we will end here on South Africa, and we'll talk about the Dutch and how South Africa kind of developed the way that it did. So if you're looking here on the map, right, here's the western part, here's the East Madagascar. Oh, remember the Disney cartoon movie where you didn't see any humans? It's populated. There's more people there than in Ireland, but in Disney you wouldn't know that. Anyhow, so we mainly had herder and farmers that were not colonized by the Europeans. In 1652, the Dutch East India Company, and you'll notice that these merchant ship companies really are what helped set up a lot of colonialism, from the English to the Dutch and other Europeans. So they set up a station attracting settlers from the Netherlands. Dutch Boers, they were later, these settlers were called, also now are known as Afrikaners. They took over and exterminated most of the local population. And then the British took over in 1806. And there is a history of dealing with the Boer Wars, which we're not going to go into much detail, but just to say that the British and the Dutch settlers actually fought very hard against each other, and the British did total war at times on the Dutch Boers, meaning a really kind of merciless fighting against them. Afrikaners to this day remember this tragedy, but of course this is a multi-layered set of events, right? You have the Dutch settlers being brutalized or believing that they're on the innocent side compared to the aggression of the British, when in the meantime the British and the Dutch were going to see the indigenous populations of black Africans as nothing and victimize them on a major scale. And in fact, an apartheid system was set up in South Africa from 1948 to 1994. I graduated high school in 92. As I grew up, there was a big deal, the issue of apartheid in South Africa. Some of you who are younger are not going to be familiar with this. Apartheid is an Afrikaner word. It's related to English, the term apartness. This was like segregation in the United States, but on a much grander scale. And so it was illegal for blacks and whites to marry, the segregated beaches, drinking fountains, and so forth. And black Africans were regulated or relegated to ghetto communities. A very brutal system in which the United States and Britain supported, because the African National Congress and other African groups that were fighting for equality, or many of them were Marxist. This was the Cold War, when it was like, if you were close to communism, no matter what your system was, well, if the United States was going to support whoever was the most anti-communist. In any case, we can debate a lot about that or discuss it. Even Israel supported the apartheid regime of South Africa. A very controversial history within Africa, and controversial for the way that Western nations dealt with this regime. And what else should I say about the apartheid system? Nelson Mandela, who is aging rapidly, and his health deteriorating as rapidly, should I say, aging normally like we do, but he was actually in prison for much of his life fighting the apartheid system. And then what's significant is that he became the first black African president. Okay, I'm probably going to be talking about this at another lecture, but just something to give you a heads up on. So this is the story of South Africa and the Dutch. And many of these settlers, by the way, saw their conquest of this land like ancient Israel and conquest of Canaan in the Bible. So there is a Protestant Christianity mixed into this. Very interesting. You should look it up. more on, let's see here. I had this, all my clips are not working, but The Gods Must Be Crazy was a famous, popular kind of comedy coming out of South Africa. And why I wanted to show it is that it was actually made by a pro-apartheid white South Afrikaner, portraying many stereotypes about um, Africans in the bush. They exaggerated the clicking sounds in the language, and there's all sorts of controversial political um, messages being sent in a film that is otherwise seems very innocent and enjoyed by many people without any thought to the message that was being put into it. So what happens? The global shift in wealth and power. Ultimately, do we want to end this on? 16th to 18th centuries Europeans created history's first truly global connections. Okay, this is significant. And so let's think about that. 16th to 18th centuries Europeans created history's first truly global connections. Small European states were able to become dominators of the world by 1800, by the 19th century. Europe and the Americas generated enormous wealth on the servitude of countless African slaves. And that's really, what it adds up to. When what's interesting now is the way that economics and geopolitics operate currently within European nations and the United States. And I think that if one kind of like keeps this history in mind and thinks about the significance of these time periods, it does help explain certain things that you see going on today. So I'll end that here with chapter 23. And again, as I always say, any questions, any thoughts, just write me.